I'm allergic to that sense of the film not being true to itself. So that's what I was talking about, where I'm watching the film and then I go, I see they have an agenda. You know, like we've all been there, where you see, oh my gosh, I can't believe they just said that.
But what we're trying to do here is to answer something more fundamental, which is, what is a film? What makes it great? All right, Nathan, great to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
So the subtitle of this podcast is Great Books and First Principles. And we read a lot of great books here, obviously, and a number of them are works of art, what you would traditionally call works of art. So Dante, for example, The Divine Comedy, Shakespeare, Dostoevsky. These are novels, plays. We read some poetry. So works that would kind of be classified as great works of art. And so I thought today it'd be interesting and fun to talk about another realm of art where we might find great works, and that would be film. And this fits with some of your own interests. You've been involved to some degree with the film industry in the past. So what do you think?
I'm in, let's do it. Yeah, I've always wanted to make films since I was 13, and doing cowboy movies and putting firecrackers in the end of the 6-shooters. I've always wanted to do that, but I've never made money doing that. So it's just been relegated to a hobby.
So you came here to make some money making films.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Well, we talked about last time
straight.
why I came here to learn about technology, and we just read from books and write with pens. Yeah, definitely. And I think this is a good discussion to talk about art, because we talked about last time work and the purpose of work, and we were saying, work is for the sake of something. You work for money, or you work for food. But one of the things that you might work for is to enjoy beauty or enjoy great pieces of art. And those are different than work, because you don't go look at a great painting in order that you may do something else.
Yeah.
If you see a great work of art, then it may change you, but it's not the same thing. You're not doing it in order that you may be changed. You're doing it to enjoy the doing of it. It is self-contained. It's for its own sake, in a way.
Yeah, a word that comes up a lot around here in Aristotle and various authors in our curriculum is contemplation. And sometimes that word has a very sort of kind of foreign and stuffy
monastic
connotation to it. Yeah, as though we're living in a monastery, or it's something you could only do in a chapel. But I think you're right that anytime you really take in a great novel, great film, you go to an art museum, or you're just pondering something on your wall, that's contemplation. You're intellectually engaged with something and letting its meaningfulness strike you in some way. So, okay, we like movies, like most people do. You've had some involvement with the film industry, nonetheless.
Yeah, I think we've established that we can't speak authoritatively on this, because it's a hobby for me. I'm interested in great stories, and you're a philosopher by day. But as you said, the name of the podcast includes the subtitle First Principles. And so part of the fun is saying, how can you take any subject that you might be interested in and look at it from a first principles standpoint? So I'm super excited to try to do that with film, with movies. What makes a good film? What makes a bad one?
Great. So from a couple guys who are neither professional film critics nor professional filmmakers.
Exactly.
We will talk about...
We have thoughts.
We have thoughts. And we'll see where they go as to what makes a great film, what film is even. Relying on first principles, relying on thinking about some of the authors we read in this program who have some profound things to say about art, about reality, and the human experience. So, what makes a great film? What are some initial thoughts that come to mind, just simply, you might say, from a layman's standpoint? When we talk about great films, it seems like at least one of the things we have in mind is that there's some kind of impact, right? Something was shown me. I encountered something that deeply impacted me, right? And that could be in terms of something very kind of serious and dark and tragic, but it could also be in terms of something incredibly joyful, maybe even something very lighthearted, right? There are different ways of being impacted across the emotional spectrum. What else?
I would also invert that question, because sometimes it's easier to attack it from the other side and say, what makes a bad movie, or why is a movie bad? Because unfortunately, we have lots of experience with bad art, just because only the small percentage of art is actually great.
Yeah.
And I think what a bad film is one that is trying. I mean, there's probably lots of reasons for a movie to be bad. And there was one filmmaker that said, movies want to be bad. As you're making them, they want to be bad. So you have to work hard to try to fight that. But I was just thinking that, a movie that is trying to get you to do something, like buy a certain brand of soda or something, is a commercial, And if it's trying to get you to do something bad or crass consumerism, or trying to do something that you might think is good, like some moral conversion or something. Still, if the movie is existing in order to get you to do some separate thing, then it no longer is that self-contained piece. So I would say that's a bad movie. And so then a good movie, you're saying a sign of a good movie is that it impacts you in some way, a deep way, a lighter way, but it leaves a mark in a way. Maybe it changes you a little bit.
And it does that just in virtue of what it is. It's
Yeah,
not
exactly,
like it
yeah.
has to measure its results against what it has gotten you to do or how it's manipulated you to feel.
It gotten you to vote in a certain way, or join a certain religion, or buy a certain product. All of those things turn the movie. It ceases to be art at that point, and it becomes propaganda.
We've referred to Joseph Pieper in the past in some of our discussions, and he's relying on Aristotle and Aquinas and Plato for this insight. But he holds that art, along with prayer and philosophy, are activities that, of their nature, are not manipulatory, but they can be abused in a manipulative fashion. And to the extent that they are, that's a perversion. That's something that people have done with art in this case. That's against its very nature.
Yeah, the way I think of it is like a fruit because movies may make this mistake. Like a James Bond may have a certain brand of watch or something like that, and you could think of that as like a fruit that has a little bit of rottenness on it. Like you cut away a bad spot, it's no big deal. It can still be a great film. But at a certain point, if there's too much rottenness on it, then the whole thing is spoiled. And certainly, if it's rotten to the core, then it's no good.
Yesterday, I watched Project Hail Mary.
Oh yeah.
Not a religious film in any explicit way, but it's big right now. It's getting a lot of reviews, and I wouldn't say it's one of the great films, but it was certainly enjoyable. And you got this actor who's mainly speaking to the camera a lot of the time, because Ryan Gosling plays this guy. He's out in space, and he did a great job because he doesn't have many people to talk to in the film. But you've got all these elements, right? Music and powerful cinematics. And there were times when I was sitting there wondering, okay, like in the case of the music, for example, sometimes it felt as though I were being moved to feel a certain way, right?
You're being manipulative?
Yes.
Manipulated?
Like, let's get the music in here of a certain sort so that emotionally I'm going to react in some fashion, right? And that's where...
you fought that?
I don't know that I fought it, but I was aware of it.
It took you out a little bit. I think that's actually a problem.
Yeah.
You don't want to take yourself out and start observing yourself observing the movie. You don't want that to happen.
Right. Now it was 2.5 hours plus, so that might have contributed. You can't make it's rare that you make every minute super involving and exciting. But why don't we get to some thoughts on what the nature of film is? We could spend a lot of time picking out various films and just talking about where would I put them on a 1 to 10 scale. But what we're trying to do here is to answer something more fundamental, which is, what is a film? What makes it great? So at the very meta level, one of the things, Aristotle writes this little work, The Poetics, and he's talking specifically in that work about Greek tragedy, but he has some really interesting things up front to say about art as a whole. And it's this notion that you find with him and some of the other ancient philosophers that art imitates nature, as they say, or to put it slightly differently, art imitates reality. what do you think about that claim? Just that that's part of the very essence or nature of art, no matter what form of art we're talking about, is that in some way it's an imitation of reality. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I think so. A nuance comes to mind, or a distinction, I guess, in that one way to imitate reality is to just turn a camera on and watch somebody go about their day as they make coffee, make breakfast, talk, yell at the kids, you know, and that would be boring and not art, but it'd be real.
And it wouldn't make any money.
I wouldn't pay for that. I feel like I've seen those types of live streams, but I don't. So there's something about imitating reality that doesn't just mean a boring, a boring scene of people talking. It means a deeper truth about reality, maybe. The funny thing to me is that you could imagine two scenarios: one where you just turn a camera on and you see somebody go about their life, and it could be a interesting life, and they could have interesting challenges, but just having the camera on and filming them would be, as we said, extremely boring, and may not convey to the viewer anything about the dynamics of the life decisions that they have to make. Whereas you could have another movie that takes some liberties about, like, say, even if it's historical, they may change some facts in order to get at a deeper truth in a condensed version that fits the medium of film. And so you would say that film is closer to reality, is a truer film than a film that just had the camera on and just watched people actually living their lives. So what do you think about that difference?
Yeah. Well, I hear what you're saying. It seems like we often talk about film. We'll ask the question, I've heard of this movie, what's it about? When you ask what it's about, in some way you're getting to that notion of, okay, what's the reality that's being imitated or harnessed here? What's the human story that's being depicted? You could, in some crude way, call that almost like the content of the film. But then there's another question, but was it a good film? By which often we mean something like, was it well made? Was it well done? Mm-hmm. Okay, it's this story. How did they do in terms of the filmmaking? And that's more the imitative process, right? So I think what you're drawing attention to is this notion that art imitates reality. It's a very simple phrase, but we've got to think about, well, what's the reality? What's the human reality that we're really trying to get to? Mm-hmm. And then what does it mean to imitate? And I think you're absolutely right that imitate doesn't mean just replicate or copy. Mm-hmm. But imitate somehow allows for the human agent, right, the artist, to approach this reality that he's trying to capture in some way. And that may involve, well, we use the word creative, moves on his part, right? In this imitative process.
What do you mean by it may involve moves?
Creative moves. So there's a way
artistic
in which
license?
the artist is bringing something of his or herself, right? Of the artist's own perception to the story, to the art piece, whatever form we're talking about.
Yeah.
But it's in order to somehow bring this reality into light. And that's fascinating in itself, that it seems like the world doesn't just do that for us. Mm-hmm. Part of what we're here for is to bring things into light, but that involves putting something of ourselves into it, our own perception somehow. Yeah,
well, it makes me think of, to me it's sometimes simpler to think of other forms of art like paintings. Mm-hmm. And if you think of a painting that is a depiction of, let's say, like a mother picking up her child, and you can imagine a photograph of that also. And we probably have hundreds or thousands of those types of photos on our phones, and a lot of them are not great works of art. But when an artist does a great work of art, it's because they've captured something that is more than just the physical reality, or just two humans and one human picking up another human, but they've captured something else. And I don't know what that is, but is it the love or the care that the mother has for the child, a look in the mother's eye, a look on the child's face? There's something that transcends the boring, practical, day-to-day moment that is maybe what you're saying, coming from the artist, and the artist is imbuing that into their work of art.
Yeah, so you might remember something about the way your mother cared for you, or remember seeing in your own life the way your mother cared for a sibling, and there's maybe just some vague notion of a kind of tenderness or attentiveness, and you're trying to bring that forth in some new tangible fashion. There's this expression that art makes the invisible visible somehow.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what we're talking about here, is that there's a part of the human reality is a deeper than what can just be sensed.
Yeah.
And so, but how do you make that sensible? How do you make that visible? And that's something, of all beings in creation, only a human can do. And that's the artistic thing, the artistic process somehow.
I've seen a movie that seemed like it was made by a monkey.
Really?
Yeah. Just kidding.
Any names? You kidding?
No. I've just seen a lot of bad movies, and with AI, we're probably going to see a lot more. But who knows what's going to happen? This is interesting, very, very interesting, because we're saying art imitates reality, but we're saying it's something maybe not obvious or not on the surface of reality that's being imitated. It's something transcendent or deeper than just the kind of the facts on the screen.
Yeah, I wonder if even something, to put it this simply, that in some way what art is capturing, or at least in many cases, let's say, especially with film in mind, are human stories, human actions, a kind of human narrative. And that could be something, it could be a very profound or great or spectacular human action, but it could be something very simple. So that you could have a film about family life, or about working in the fields, humble realities from an exterior perspective. But what could be great about a film that does this well is to help reveal to us the meaningfulness of these actions, the meaningfulness of something as simple as preparing a meal or as caring for a child. It seems like in our society in particular, it's all too easy to just sweep by even the simple activities that compose everyday life, but that are filled with meaning, because this is how people are raised and how people are formed.
And a meaning in life that we might not even see as we're living it, but we'll see in a piece of art that could then remind us or call to mind or even teach us about a deeper reality that we didn't know about.
Yeah.
I also think it's interesting because you were talking about the artist trying to bring to the work of art something in them. But don't you think that can happen sometimes without the artist fully intending it? In other words, if the artist depicts the reality in the best way that they can, then it's necessarily going to be filtered through who they are as a person. And that what can be expressed could be something that even they can't articulate or didn't expect or didn't intend, but yet does exist in the work of art.
Absolutely. In fact, yeah, I think you're making a great distinction here, that to say the artist brings something of his or herself, we probably shouldn't think of that primarily psychologically, in the sense that, oh, this is part of or this is what happened to me, I'm just going to throw it in to the art piece. But rather, my perception is trained in a certain way, or my perception is of a certain sort, and that's what I'm seeing, I really think is something important, and I'm trying to bring that to life. I'm trying to bring that into the art piece, so it remains objective in a very healthy way, right? That's what the artist should be concerned with, is what is it that I'm seeing? Can I embody that in art, rather than just something like sheer self-expression?
And what about the viewer, the person who's receiving the art or contemplating the art? Can you have one person that sees it and gets one message from it or one truth from it, and another person that sees it and gets a totally different truth from it?
Well, absolutely. And I think this goes back to the notion of of art imitating reality. So if we think about our encounters with reality itself, I'm driving past a farm or the ocean, right? I encounter reality or other people. All of those realities will strike all of us in some slightly different way. And so it's to be expected that in as much as art is a kind of, Tolkien used the phrase, a subcreation of a certain kind, we're bringing, in a way, out of creation, we're bringing new items into reality. That's what the artistic process is. Well, then those things would also show us something at their core, and yet more likely than not affect us in different ways. But I think this also gets into another important first principle here regarding film. So we've touched on this reality that art imitates nature. But it's also the case, and Plato and Aristotle will talk about this, and then much of the tradition following them, that art necessarily occurs in a medium. So we have painting, we have music, we have dance, we've got theater, we've got film. Art, by making the invisible visible, it has to occur somehow within some tangible medium, some form. So when we think about whether a film is good, for example, what makes a great film, or whether a film was well done, we're both looking at what is the reality that's being depicted, but also, did it do justice to the medium? What is the medium of film, and what are the elements of the film medium, and was the medium treated in an excellent manner? Right?
So what would be an example of not doing it well, not respecting the medium correctly?
Well, so we'll have to get into what the medium is for film, but one initial example that comes to mind would be, okay, if I were to have a character in a film who started just speaking or thinking out loud in a manner that's prosaic, that would just more suitably be found in a novel, but I'm just happened to capture this person on film. At that point, I might start to wonder, okay, is the verbal element here really suited to the medium of film, or would this be better in a book, in a novel, where I could sit down and read it?
So because film is a visual medium, that something that a lecture or somebody speaking about motivations, and even sometimes when you're making film, they say you shouldn't have a narrator, and they also say you need to know the rules in order to break them. So obviously there's been great films with narrators, but I wonder if that's all along the lines of what you're getting at, that those things are they're not embracing the medium of film as a visual medium, and maybe acting more like what you'd have in a novel, where it would be more literary in the sense of words and interior thoughts and things like that.
Yeah, and it can be, a lot of these things are the sorts of problems that you might be able to, notice when you see them, but it might be hard to put a finger on why.
Yeah.
So again, just to take a very simple example, if you were to sing a novel, it would just be irritating. Now why? That's a different sort of question. But at the very least, you can just see there's a mismatch between the medium of expression, the medium of the artistry, and what's being contained. So that's an interesting reality in itself, that we might talk about what an art piece is about, what it's portraying, and how well it did so. But it might be the case that those two are always much more integrated, or they ought to be. Even if we can sort of distinguish them for various purposes.
Yeah, I did have an example. I remember really enjoying the Brideshead miniseries, and liking the book as well.
Brideshead Revisited?
Brideshead Revisited, yeah. And then more recently, I getting ready for a book club, I read it and then immediately watched it. And it felt like I read it twice, because the way some of those British miniseries are done is they just take a lot of the dialogue straight out of the book, and then they have, the miniseries is fairly long, and then it felt like it was slavishly copying every section of the book. So I still think it's good, and the performances are amazing in the miniseries, but it felt like it's good because it's a good book in the way that a book is good, and less in the way that a film is good.
That's really interesting. So maybe we should try and tackle more directly the question as to what the medium is for film, because I think what you're pointing to is something about film that's unique and potentially difficult in our conversation, which is that it seems as though there's many elements to the medium of film, more than you've had in any other art form in the past.
Because you have the performance of the actors, you have the visual elements, and then you have the music.
Yeah, you've got the words, you've got the motions.
You could have dance. You could film art. I guess you could see beautiful architecture. You know, people say, "Oh, the movie was boring, but it had amazing cinematography." But all of those are components that can go together to make a great film.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the fact that it's all, well, what would the adjective be? But it's all on screen. It's that kind of a reproduction, rather than something sort of directly experienced. So would you say that there's one of those elements among all the others is kind of predominant when it comes to the medium of film? Is there one that kind of takes center place here, and the others are typically found but not as crucial?
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe let me talk through what the way I think of building a good story, and tell me if that's illuminating that at all, or if I'm on a different track. But you know, when I used to study how Pixar puts together movies, they talk about this very simple framework that basically starts as once upon a time there were these characters, and every day they did something until one day, right? So that's the inciting incident. Until one day, and then because of that, something happens, and then because of that, something happens, and because of that, something happens, until at the very last moment. And then they all lived happily ever after. Then because of that, they all lived in this new way, the resolution at the end of that. And so the way I think of it is that you have a kind of promise at the beginning. You set up a scenario, and a lot of times it's a character that wants something or needs something, or a desire. And it's kind of a promise that's presented. And then, or a need that needs to be fulfilled. And then there's an inciting incident that kind of starts the story going. Like, given this setup, you throw a wrench in it. You start them on the journey, and then there's this kind of cause and effect of the movie getting propelled along. So in other words, it's not random things that are happening. Usually, it's the events and the decisions. A lot of times, you want the protagonist to be active and that they're trying to achieve something. And then they make a decision, and because of that, some other difficulty happens. In some ways, it's a dialectic where you have the characters trying to do something, and then an antagonistic force or a villain is trying to stop them. And so then that dialectic goes back and forth until they hit that moment, usually right before the climax, the moment where all is lost. The one side seems to have won. And then at the very last minute, there's kind of a resolution or a climax that's pulled out of it that fulfills the promise that was presented at the beginning. And then I'm reminded of the idea of how do you carve an elephant? You just cut away all the parts that aren't an elephant. So a film is good insofar as it cleanly lays out the promise and then gives the best action given the nature of the characters that tries towards the promise and gets rejected or pushed back from the promise, and goes back and forth until that promise is revealed in a way that needs to be surprising and inevitable. So there's the paradox. It has to be inevitable in the sense that is the fulfillment of the promise that was given to you at the beginning. That's the inevitability. But it has to be surprising also, because if you saw it coming, it's predictable and it's not interesting and nothing new has been said. And so if you have a movie that's inevitable but not surprising, it's just boring. If you have a movie that's surprising but not inevitable, it's like they call it deus ex machina, where the resolution happens because at the very last moment, then the helicopters come in out of nowhere and rescue them, even though the movies had nothing to do with helicopters and nothing to do with this external force that just comes in like a god and solves everything. And so that's surprising. Nobody would have expected, helicopters in Jane Austen. It's not inevitable. It doesn't follow.
Yeah.
So you end up with this elephant, if you imagine the analogy of carving an elephant, this perfect elephant that has no element that doesn't lend towards telling of that story, no extra element, but also, you want it to be simple as the subject allows, but no simpler. So you want to have every component that will flesh out this perfect little story that you're telling. And then it's good if it all hangs together and all makes sense in itself. And so trying to go back to your question, which I may have gone off on a tangent, but trying to go back to your question of saying what in that medium is the most important thing that you're relying on. It seems to me it's maybe the medium of the promise and the human actions, like the human activity and decisions and things that are thrusting it along the way. So as depicted, so it's being depicted through the moving images, the visuals, but what's being depicted is the human actions and decisions that are portrayed.
Yeah, it's interesting because what you've just said aligns in many respects with the way Aristotle talks about story in the Poetics, right? And there he's talking specifically about tragedy, Greek tragedy. As it's come down to us, you've got it in written form. You can read Antigone and talk about it. You can also see it performed, right? You can see a play as it was originally meant to be. But there's something central about the action, about the human action, about the story, and Aristotle talks about the unity, the simplicity, as you were, and also the fact that there needs to be some sort of revelation or climax. I mean, different words are given to it, right? But a kind of surprise. Now, it's still the case that this all occurs in film through the moving image. So if you didn't have the moving image, there's a way in which you'd say, well, I just don't have this kind of art in front of me, right?
Like with a radio play or something where you're just listening to it?
Right. Or again, something that I just read in print. And it's interesting that something like a Shakespearean play or a Greek tragedy can be read on its own and discussed, whereas I don't know that there are many film scripts like that, which indicates that there might be, as important, as crucial a story is, it might be less important in some way than it was in the case of, say, tragedy or theater more broadly.
Yeah, tell me if this is getting at what you're saying. I believe it's David Mamet who talks about the film being the juxtaposition of images. So if you have a shot of an actor looking at something, then you cut to what they're looking at. It could be a bowl of porridge. Then you're conveying a human looking at food. But you could cut to a beautiful sunset or a deer or a woman. And you've created something through the image, the juxtaposition of two different images combined together, that is maybe what you're getting at is kind of truly the film part of it. So you have the performance of the actor, but the actor could be thinking about M&Ms. The actor doesn't have to be thinking of a beautiful sunset, but the filmmaker can still convey a truth by having the actor look pensively, think about M&Ms, but then show a sunset, and the film is showing a man contemplating the sunset.
Yeah, and it's amazing how you can, you think of examples like No Country for Old Men, for example. It's a great film by most standards, and there might be one scene with a radio playing some music, but otherwise there is no music.
No music,
in that film.
yeah. But it's still a film.
And a great film, and you could imagine films that are very minimal when it comes to speaking, perhaps have no speech at all, but it's at least possible that a film could be great.
That's how film started, right? They didn't have something.
That's right. Yeah, it was very awkwardly interwoven from our perspective now.
Yes.
So in some way, the moving image is at the heart of the film, and then these other forms of medium sort of build on top of that.
But elements of it, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess I'd be tempted to think that what you said about the centrality of story is still central. That is to say, in most films, if human characters are involved, whether it be spoken, whether it be verbal or not, there's a depiction of some kind of action. some kind of story, something meaningful in human life.
I mean, part of the story itself also is a through line through these other mediums, from talking around a campfire to books, and to plays and radio, and then to to film. So that there is the element that's in common with all of them, which is the story. But then, to your point, it's being told in a way that's specific to film, which is through the moving image.
And that's where my contributions here sort of hit a wall, because to go further means that you need to know film. You need to know film as a medium and how to work with it. Right? It's akin to, okay, if I want to become a sculptor, just good at whittling, I need to find the right sort of knife, the right tools. I need to become acquainted with the different kinds of wood that are out there, and actually spend a lot of time, hopefully under the kind of apprenticeship to someone who's a master, and learn how to whittle, how to carve.
And learn by doing.
Learn by doing, yeah.
So that your humility is refreshing, that you're restraining yourself from any further expertise or insights. But I did want to make it a little bit more complicated to me, that trying to figure out, because we were talking about what makes a bad film, and that's a film that's trying to serve some other purpose besides itself. But so when you talk about a great film and a film that depicts reality, can you have, I mean, there's lots of interesting questions, right? Can you have a bad person make a great film? And can you have a great film, meaning like, wow, that was an amazing movie, but it depicted a reality that you don't agree with? Like, let's say that it depicts nihilism, right? Because we were talking about No Country for Old Men, and a lot of people watch that movie and feel like it's nihilistic, and that it is presenting as a thesis that everything is random and hope is the stuff of dreams, and you wake up into a reality that is meaningless. And so could you say, well, if that's true, then I don't think that value is real or true on a fundamental level, but yet it's a great film. So how would you talk about those? First, a bad person, can they make a good film? Like, filter through this bad human a good thing, or a human that's trying to make a film to depict at a fundamental level something that you might not agree with, which is that reality is meaningless, but then still be a good film in some way.
Yeah, those are both huge questions. On the first one, in terms of the character of the artist, I think just historically, it is interesting that we know there are many artists who were many great artists who were given to various forms of dissipation. In fact, that's almost a stereotype sometimes.
Yeah, some people think that you have to be a bad person in order to be. You have to be tortured in order to be a good artist.
Yeah, or an alcoholic or something like that. Now, so Aristotle makes this great distinction in the Ethics, and he's talking about the intellectual virtues. That is to say, just the different ways in which our minds can be excellent. And he distinguishes between morality on the one hand, prudence and the other virtues, and what he calls art. These are two ways in which our minds can be excellent, okay? And one of the big distinctions between art and morality is that if you possess the moral virtues, then by definition, your human actions are good ones, as opposed to bad, as opposed to vicious. If you possess the intellectual virtue of art, what that means is that your actions are good insofar as they've brought this medium into a good shape, into an excellent shape somehow. And so the good that's achieved is in the work of art. It's not within yourself. It kind of starts from within you through some vision or perception or sense of things you have, but what you're ultimately there for, what your end is, your goal, is to see something excellent in the novel or in the film or in the statue. Not that your actions characterize you as a human in some virtuous manner. And so that's the underlying reason Aristotle gives for why it can be the case that someone could be unvirtuous, someone could have in various ways a poor character, and yet still be capable of bringing forth tremendous works of art. Now, if you were to take the more extreme cases and think of someone who is simply vicious, kind of across the board, in all ways, well, probably still be pretty rare that you'd get great art from such a person, just because his or her passions would be so dominant in life that it might be hard to imagine this person being productive in any serious way.
But I mean, you could imagine a great singer in that small way. They could be a vicious person and can sing, perform a beautiful aria.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
Okay, so we've solved that. You can have a great work of art, even if because the perfection of that is in the external thing, the piece of art. It kind of, again, we talked about this like self-contained thing that you can enjoy in itself, and the creator of the artist over here may have lots of corruptions in their nature, or make bad decisions, or be a bad human, but that they could still be able to make great art.
Yeah.
But then, so now what about the idea of, let's just take No Country for Old Men as an example. You have people that are pretty sure that the message of it is that reality is meaningless. And so how could you say, well, it's a great movie, if you disagree? I mean, if you agree with it, then you could say it's a great movie because it correctly reflects the reality that nothing matters. And then you're done. But if you were to say, well, I think that life does have meaning, but this film's fundamental message is that it doesn't, then how could it still be a good movie?
So yeah, I guess I would go back to this fundamental notion that art imitates reality in some way. And typically, in the case of film, we're talking about art imitating some sort of human realities. And often it may be human emotions or ideas or expressions. And again, we're trying to make what's interior and in a way invisible visible. Now, and hopefully the art piece or the film does so in a good way, some excellent way. Are there people who encounter very, very bleak situations? Yes.
In reality, you mean?
Yeah, in reality. Is tremendous evil present in the world? Yes, it is. Are there human beings who, in the face of encountering terrible evil, hopeless, despairing? Yes, there are. So, in a way, the question for me is, what is it that the film No Country for Old Men is depicting? What is it imitating? And to a great extent, I think you have to say there's a certain form of evil that's present as embodied in the Chigurh character. Mm-hmm. And you have Tommy Lee Jones, who's he's on the right side. Yeah, he's a good man, and yet he doesn't know what to do in the face of this evil. And he does seem to, at the end, as you say, there does seem to be a kind of a bleak and despairing, if not nihilistic, closure. Mm-hmm. So, but these are realities that occur, and there are characters in human life for whom this is the reality. So, if that is depicted genuinely, well, then in a way, the film has achieved what art sets out to do, namely to excellently imitate some dimension of human reality, right? It's then a further sort of extrapolation to walk away from that and say, oh, what these filmmakers were intending is this universal message that that there is no meaning in reality, and therefore it's a bad film, or I don't like the film. Well,
that's a very interesting point, though, because again, what we were saying before is that the art stands alone. It stands on itself. So if you start to impute motivations to the filmmakers, maybe they're there, maybe they weren't there. But we said before that you could have bad motivations and make great art. So in a way, the art stands by itself. And if there's something about the nature of evil that involves random viciousness and violence, and that is true about the reality of evil, and the film does a very good job of portraying that evil in that way, then as a standalone piece, it's revealed reality.
Exactly. This idea that the randomness you bring up, and that's part of what's so distinctive about the evil in No Country for Old Men, is this sense that, well, it doesn't matter whom this character kills or not from his point of view, because nothing matters. Well, that is, in some deep way, that's the very definition of evil, is pure absurdity. Evil is ultimately without reason. It's anti-logos. And so it should be expected that evil starts to look simply random and without sense the further you get into it. And you can see this, and it's not peculiar to Cormac McCarthy. I mean, you can see it in the great depictions of evil going back through some of the Shakespearean tragedies and all the way back to the Greek tragedies. Yeah. Now, when it comes to the sort of side of the good in the film, the fact that, because what feels depressing, what feels bleak, is the fact that the human agent of good doesn't defeat the evil in the traditional sense, and indeed seems baffled by the presence of this evil. And so the question is that an accurate depiction of human reality? Well, of course it is. There again, humans all the time face moments of evil that, in the face of which they are helpless, right? And to be able to depict that not just in a truthful way, but in a very excellent artistic manner,
in a visceral way,
yes, is an accomplishment. Now you could then ask further questions, debate questions like, well, why would someone want to spend their time depicting that side of life as opposed to something brighter? Or why should I spend my time 2 hours watching that film? Okay, those are distinct questions, right? And maybe for me, that isn't my thing, so I'm going to go watch a comedy. That's fine, but that's not to impugn the work of art itself.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I did want to defend the film because I don't know if the filmmakers intended this. I don't know if it's there at all. But just to throw out my thinking of this, the Tommy Lee Jones character seems like the hero, and at various times the other characters, named Llewellyn, the one that first takes the money, he seems like the hero, and then he dies and we don't even see. Sorry, spoiler alert. He dies and we don't even see the manner of his death. So again, it emphasizes that randomness, you know. But I was thinking when I was watching some of these reviews that the hero is actually the wife, I think, in one sense, because they were saying that the reason that the character is so scary, the Chigurh character who's hunting them down, is because he represents that life is meaningless. And so it's not so much that as a man he's scary, but the idea, which Tommy Lee Jones feels like he can't defeat the idea that life is meaningless. And that's what's so terrifying. But when the wife,
the wife
of Llewellyn, who hears that he takes the money and is just very devoted to him, and doesn't really do too much through the film. So it's the younger wife, the younger woman in the film, and I was thinking, in some ways, the other characters are active, and so you think that they're the heroes, but she just seems like a very good person, and then when she's confronted at the very end with the challenge to call the coin heads or tails, she refuses to play the game, and she says, the coin has no say over this. It's only you. She says this to the bad guy. She refuses to play. And to me, that's the victory over the idea. She rejects the idea that life is meaningless. And then we don't even see whether she dies or not. Mm. And I think the point there is that it doesn't matter if she dies or not, because it's not about the individual deaths or the individual man or the individual woman. It's the scary thing is the idea that life is meaningless. And she defeats that idea. She rejects that idea. Now, I think the film has plenty of nuance to take it one way or another. And so it's kind of funny to me, going full circle back to what we were talking about before, of how you have some of these bad films that are trying to maybe convert you to a certain religion. You have faith-based movies, and a lot of people say, that they're very hard to watch and they're not very compelling. They're trying to depict good. And yet, if you look at Dostoevsky and then all back through the Greek tragedies, as you mentioned, there's a evil is given its day in court. There's a very serious attempt to present evil as it is and as we encounter it. And I think only in doing that will you have the best idea of the good that conquers evil. But it is presented in a way that, going back to first principles, you are challenged to examine your principles and to wrestle with the ideas of whether life is meaningless or isn't meaningless. And so a great work of art lets you do that.
Yeah, okay, so you're bringing up now a whole other question, very interesting one, which has to do specifically with film kind of from a Christian point of view, or Catholic point of view even. And so, yeah, I guess building on top of what we've said up to this point, is there anything additional that we want to say about what makes a great Catholic film? Or is that notion even itself coherent, right? To talk about what Christian film, Catholic film, in a way, we know what that phrase refers to if we're talking about a given filmmaker or even a production house that simply makes religious films.
Yeah.
But in terms of art itself, is it coherent to speak that way even? I wish there were more Christian films, Catholic films.
Yeah, and I'm challenged with this because I'm trying to help projects that might want to make good films. And it's so tempting for people, if they are Catholic, to say, make good Catholic films. And so I think, all right, I'm going to go find filmmakers that can make Catholic films. And so then I present to them an opportunity. Here's some money. Use this to go make a story about a Christian point, a person encountering Jesus and finding salvation. But didn't I just violate everything that we've been talking about, which is that the film itself shouldn't be used as a way to force somebody to convert? That it has to exist on its own. And if it's existing on its own as a depiction of reality, then what does it mean to say, oh, it needs to be Catholic?
You could imagine a film that depicts any portion of reality in a very excellent way, even evil, right? And there doesn't need to be anything about that film that you might say is intrinsically against religion or against Christianity.
Or for it.
Or for it, right? Because what the film does as such, hopefully, is to portray reality. Now, I guess you'd still have the question, okay, is it possible to evangelize through film, right? That's a big kind of notion that's out there.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, from what you're saying, that you're leaning toward the answer being no. Is that right? Or do you think it is possible in some sense?
Well, if you try to evangelize through film, I think you end up not evangelizing and not creating art. So you kind of fail on both counts. But
and just to be clear, and you think that because you're regarding the intentionality there as regarding the art piece primarily as a means to an end, and not as an end in itself.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. The art being its own end instead of being subordinated to another end that you're trying to use it for, which is the definition of commercials. I mean, a commercial tries to get you to buy a product by having some pleasing bit of what they could call art, but it's only art with quotations because it's not real art. You know, if you come from a worldview that involves there is a God who seeks our own good and we are broken and he comes to save us. If that is your view, that is your view of reality. And so if you focus on making a film that depicts reality in an excellent way, again, most films want to be bad. Most films are bad by default. But if you get that film, that piece of art that stands on its own and is excellent, and it reflects reality, then it's truth in a way. And I think that its existence points to kind of further into reality, to the author of reality, to a deeper reality. It points there, not the purpose of it to get you to do a certain thing, just by the nature of it being an accurate reflection of reality. We talked about making the hidden things visible. So reality itself points to the author of reality. But when you make a hidden thing visible and somebody is confronted with that and they change through that through being confronted with a part of reality, then they are pointed towards a deeper reality, the thing behind reality. And so in a way you could say that could lead them to God, and in a way you could say there's an evangelizing aspect of it. But do you think that's a fair distinction to make?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I mean, in that light, just any great work of art has, you might say, a kind of indirect and potentially evangelizing character to it, just insofar as it's portraying something true, portraying something of truth in the human situation.
You said evil is anti-logos. It is chaos. It is a rejection of order. So
I guess the an important difference there between what you're talking about and what many Christian films purport to be is that the latter involve something like a moral call to them.
A call to action, yeah.
In some sense, yeah. And that's not foreign to the notion of story. It's been the case forever, right, throughout the whole literary tradition, that you'll have forms of storytelling that are meant to move or persuade a reader in some sense, like a fable, right?
But that is kind of going against what I said, so I'm interested to dig into that a little bit more, because I was saying insofar as it's doing that, it's not art. But maybe there's a nuance here that we need to draw out.
Well, or it might just be a question as to whether it's it achieves all that art could be, whether it's great art, right? That is to say, you have stories written down. You also have a great many films, I would think, that they don't rise to that level of what you might call great art, and yet they are capable of they're sort of passable versions or instances of their medium, and they can be enjoyed. But what they intend is to move the reader in some way toward the good. And how they do that, well, there you might have a real spectrum in terms of the quality.
But that's what I don't like in art, is I don't like to sense the intent. Oh, they're trying to move me to do a thing. I want to rebel against that. And that's the distinction I'm trying to make, is that I totally get that you can have a piece of art that is trying to move you in a certain way, and you can still enjoy it and it can still be good and all that. But what I'm trying to say is that intent and that movement sullies or makes rotten, at least a little bit, the piece of art. Let me give this example and tell me if you think that this helps. If you have an individual who's, let's say, thinks they have a calling to be a monk, to live a life of contemplation and prayer, you could bring them a film that depicts that life. And if that life is beautiful and it depicts it in an accurate way, then the depiction, that hidden thing that's made visible, would be beautiful. And so the soul of the person watching it, who's been thinking about that vocation, could be moved to now become a monk. And I feel like that's different, but maybe it's not from what you're saying. I feel like you're just choosing, it's kind of like when you're sad, you listen to sad songs. They might depict reality well, but it makes you sad. But maybe it's a great song. It's just depicting a sad thing. And you're choosing to consume that piece of art in that moment because it will augment the mood that you're in. I want you to be a monk, and you're thinking about it. I show you a great film about being a monk, and so then maybe that'll move you to being a monk. And I don't think any of those are the thing that I'm rejecting. So I haven't. If I show you the film about being a monk and it's a beautiful film about being a monk, then I may show it to you with the intent of moving you. But my intent is just taking a piece of art and putting it in front of you, and that's different. But the intent that's imbued inside of the art to make me do a thing is what I'm saying is not art.
Yeah, well, I guess there are a variety of cases we could be thinking about. Something as simple as Aesop's fables, for example, kids read.
Yeah, morality fables. Yeah.
Yeah, morality fables is a very simple story.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because there's something you enjoy about reading those.
Yeah.
Like you read them with your kids or something, and it just has to do with the simplicity of the story.
Yeah.
Now, but you wouldn't regard them if your kid didn't the next day wake up and start acting in that virtuous manner, it's not as though you think, oh my gosh, Aesop was lame. It didn't achieve its
You
purpose.
didn't change my child. Yeah.
And so I think that's part of what's going on here too, is that there are moral realities that can be depicted in art in an excellent way.
Yeah.
But that doesn't equate to using them for the sheer sake of trying to get someone to do something. And that's using that as your backward-looking criteria by which you're going to judge those.
I see what you're saying. So you're saying, in my example of a beautiful film about being a monk, you're saying the filmmaker could choose that film, could choose to make that film because he or she wants to move others to become a monk. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's not art.
Exactly. And it could be tremendous art just simply in itself.
Yeah.
And we could all be aware even that the filmmaker was intending this, but those two are still separate dimensions.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that I'm allergic to that sense of the film not being true to itself. So that's what I was talking about, where I'm watching the film and then I go, I see they have an agenda. You know, like we've all been there, where you see, oh my gosh, I can't believe they just said that. You know, like like an anti-corporate agenda where the film is just throwing it in there because they don't like large corporations, which, you know, large corporations do lots of bad things. Make a movie about a large corporation doing a bad thing. Yeah, you can do that. But to just throw it in on the side, that's the part that I'm allergic to, because it's not true to that story. It's not true to the promise. And like I was saying, the resolution of the deeper truth, the hidden thing made visible, it's not true to that. It is bolted on. And that's the part that I'm rejecting. But I think what you're making me see is the filmmaker choosing a subject could choose a moral, a story of elucidating a certain moral that will then probably, hopefully, make people want to copy that moral because they'll see the truth of that moral in the film.
Yeah.
And then I can show you a movie that somebody else made, and my purpose is to move you in a certain way. But the film itself, that piece of art, needs to hang together and be true to itself and be self-contained.
First and foremost.
Yeah.
It really is amazing the more we're talking, just to see how much is involved in the craft.
Yeah.
Right? In knowing the medium and what goes into it, and staying true to these principles of the kind of simplicity and unity that we were talking about earlier, not bringing in what's extraneous. And then hopefully being on to something in life that's really profound that you're imitating. But all of that's going to differ, I suppose, with the person of the artist himself.
And movies are miracles because it's so difficult to write a good script. Like you said, by itself, a script is not a novel. It shouldn't be enjoyed. It's a blueprint for a film. The film itself and the filming can go horribly wrong, and usually does. The performance, and you can imagine everything working except having a bad lead actor, and that could go horribly wrong. And to have it firing on all these different cylinders and often coming out with the truths that kind of transcend any one performer or any one the filmmaker, and creating again this thing that kind of stands alone. You know, I was listening to Vince Gilligan, and he said that he's stopped trying to explain his movies to people because he often finds that when they explain his movies back to himself, or, you know, he did Breaking Bad, and these, when they explain his shows back to him, then he's learning things about it. And so he's just more concentrated on depicting that reality the best he can. And he probably does have ideas of what he's depicting there, but he also recognizes that he's depicting things that he doesn't even fully know. And it's not important to clarify the exact idea you're trying to inject there. It matters that you're trying to depict the reality as best you can and be as true to that reality as you possibly can. And then that will open up truths in the viewers.
Yeah. That's a whole interesting dimension in itself, the relationship between art and the viewer or the audience, and that there's something there that we don't want to say that the art is simply given meaning by the viewer, but the fact that you're pointing to, that what Gilligan is saying about the way in which, now that this thing is out there, it is a kind of reality unto itself, and so it should be expected and even hoped for that people would see different things in it and bring more truth to light as a result.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this is fascinating. We could talk about it at greater length, but maybe on another occasion. Thanks, Nate.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.